Welcome to our panel discussion on flipping your classroom teaching tips. Let me introduce my colleagues up here. To my immediate left is Shawn Gross, who is in engineering here at Villanova. Next to him is Sue Miner, who is in computer science at Lehigh Carbon Community College. And finally, on my very far left is Raymond Krisch, who is in computing science and math at LaSalle University. I'm Carol Weiss. I'm director of the Villanova Institute for Teaching and Learning, known as VITAL, here at Villanova. And before we hear from my colleagues, I'm going to give you a brief overview of flipped classroom. Now, I'm looking out and I see that quite a few of you were at the 9 o'clock session with my other two Villanova colleagues this morning, so by now you're experts. But for those of you who were not there, when we have the traditional model of teaching, we typically have first lecture, then homework. With the flipped classroom, what the general approach is to move the lecture outside of class so that students can get that information elsewhere, very commonly, as we'll hear, from videos. And when they're effective, those videos are really no longer than about 10 minutes, and often they'll have embedded questions or problems. We know our students' attention span is no more than 15 minutes, and so a video that accommodates that is really optimal. The class time then is used for more in-depth exploration, clarification, and individual instruction, what we sometimes call individuated learning. Now, some of you here may be in the social sciences or humanities, and to you this will not sound new because it's probably a model that's been going on since Socrates. But for people who teach math and science and engineering, this is a new way of approaching learning. Let me say very clearly, there is no one perfect model for a flipped classroom. We're all still exploring. This morning, our presenters mentioned a book which I will mention again. It's called Flip Your Classroom. It's by Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams, and it is 2012, published by the International Society for Technology and Education. And they actually, over their course of teaching, have changed their concept from the flipped classroom to flipped learning. And they say that the advantages are that flipped learning transfers ownership of learning to the students. It personalizes learning for all students. It gives teachers time to explore ways to promote deeper learning. It makes learning, not teaching, the center of the classroom. And then it maximizes face-to-face time in the classroom. So today you will hear from our panelists as they share with you their individual approaches to the flipped classroom. Shawn, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Carol. Carol had asked us to start just by kind of talking about the motivation, and I've taught this course, Structural Design, where essentially students are learning how to design concrete beams and steel columns and things that hold a building or a bridge structure up. It's a junior course, it's a required course, and I've taught that course for the better part of a decade. And it's one of those courses that had become so refined because I had literally taught it for 10 years. The notes were, I thought, near perfect. And I'll never forget, it was about 3 years ago where it kind of hit me one day about 3/4 of the way through the semester, and I'm lecturing, and it built up, but I watched the students just kind of sit through the lecture, and the smart students were zoning out. You know, I don't have a problem because I'm pretty dynamic. The lectures are intense. They're fast-paced with too much of the falling asleep and that kind of thing. But there was just a look on the students' faces that spoke volumes. And I kind of thought about it, there's got to be a better way to do this, and I'm pretty good at taking notes and kind of keeping track of time and things. So I realized when I sat down and looked at it, it's a typical college class, 35 hours is what we meet over the course of the semester. And I realized that in that class I was spending about 23 hours lecturing in terms of basic concepts and topics, but all lecturing. Now, there's too much in the course to begin with, which is a whole nother story. But we didn't have the opportunity to really do much even problem solving, which is the essence of what we'd give them on exams. So that remainder of the time, whatever the leftover, maybe 11 hours or so, maybe a third of the class, we'd crunch through real quickly an example problem at the end of class, and then I'd like most faculty, say, okay, here's your homework, go do it. And it hit me pretty clearly. I realized, even the smart students are sitting there and this generation thinking that, okay, all I really need to know is the important stuff is coming at the end. That's what I'm going to be given an exam on, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And I think doing is the key word there. So this course is all about the application. Unfortunately, in engineering, we don't want to just teach the application without having that theory, because not every problem is as linear as we like it to be. So what I did is I kind of took a step back and I thought about it. I had a lot of distance ed experience at the graduate level, because our graduate program is almost entirely synchronous or asynchronous online learning. And I realized that if I could tape the lectures, that is the theory pieces, I could basically spend all of my time in class then working on the problems. Now, again, because the course has too much in it, a problem that we finally have addressed, and next year I'm happy to say I'll be able to split it into the two courses it needs to be. But because of that, we're still not quite to the evolution of it being as problem-based and active learning in class as it needs to be. But there's been a tremendous benefit in student performance just moving to the time we're spending in the classroom is all on the application piece as opposed to the underlying theory. At the same time, there are all kinds of challenges. I'm sure there's good questions. I'm sure other speakers in other sessions are going to try and address with respect to the challenges of how do you get students to do it, how do you make sure that they're watching the lectures and those sorts of things. I do have some tips. I don't know if we want to move on to other motivation. Kind of along the lines of what we had talked about, or what Carol had talked about, I think the single biggest tip is shorter is better. The mistake that I made in version 1.0 is that my lectures are what they needed to be, but not in the context of small pieces that we have the luxury to do now. So I recognize that I don't have to stretch a lecture that's 38 minutes out to 50. I don't have to cram a lecture that's 62 minutes down into 50. But I also, I think, missed the boat the first time through in recognizing that it would be better to chop a 40-minute lecture up into 4 10-minute lectures. And even though it's the same content, even though it's the same idea, that student attention span is what it is. We're not going to change it. We might as well adapt to it and try to make the best of it. So the idea that shorter is better would definitely be one of the tips. I would also say the question I get most is, does it save you time? And depending on whether it's an administrator or whether it's a colleague, you kind of have a different look in the eyes as to what answer they expect and anticipate. And the reality is that it definitely does take a lot of time. It does not save my time to do it this way. Certainly not initially. Initially, there's a huge upfront time in at least the way I did it, in recording the lectures and in trying to organize the class as best as possible. It also, I think, depends upon whether you're in a topic where the content is going to change and evolve over time, or whether it's a static situation. I've got a little bit of both. That's another reason that I wish that I had shorter videos so that I can go back and kind of customize the pieces that need to be. Some of these things are never going to need to evolve because they're basic physics. Other things are changing on a yearly basis. So you do still have to plan. It is going to save me some time in the long run, I think, or better phrased is make better use of my time, because I do find that the second time through, it is a lot easier for me to prepare for class when all I'm doing, quote unquote, is solving problems. That is the language of my discipline. The theory behind it is critical, it's important, it's got to be understood, but there's a difference between trying to explain that theory and have the students understand it every time I'm in the classroom versus the natural progression of, well, I solve problems, I know how to do it, I don't have to think about it even. It's a natural instinct of mine to do that and to teach it. So what I have to do is prepare from an organizational perspective, but not really content. So I do think it saves a lot of time. Finally, the single most important thing by far is getting the students on board. And the first time I did it last year was very instructive. It was good. It was a challenge. We had a lot of learning to do as students and faculty in the model. This year has worked much better a second time through. Probably the single biggest thing that I did differently is I gave a wonderful sales pitch on the first day. And that sales pitch was not that you're going to love this. It was not that this is for everybody, although I believe that is the right approach. It was simply that this is what you need to expect. And walking into the classroom the first day, I actually gave them a 2-page handout. I said, here's where I think you're going to be spending your time in this class. So from day one, every student, and this is not a self-selecting situation. All of our juniors have to take this course. So like it or not like it, they're in it. But I gave them a write-up that said, here's where I expect you're going to be spending your time. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. But realize up front, you're going to spend 20-some hours watching video. You can do it how you want to. You can watch it right after you leave this classroom. You can watch it right before you come in next time. It doesn't matter as long as you're prepared for what we're going to do in class. But the trade-off is, here's what we're going to do in class. And by the way, on a homework basis, you should be spending a whole lot less time. And that has been the way it's mapped out. I'm very eager to see the feedback at the end of the year from our evaluations, and I have kind of a separate survey just on the inversion to get a little bit more feedback for the third time through. But again, the idea of selling them up front, I think, is the single biggest piece, because with this, you're really putting the responsibility on the students, and they have to be a part of that learning process. They have to take ownership of it. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Thank you, Shawn. Let me just say before we hear from Sue and Raymond that both Sue and Raymond will be giving their own 45-minute sessions later on today. Raymond at 12 and Sue at 3 in the blue room, which is sort of at the exact opposite end of the building. So I hope you'll keep those in mind too. Sue?
Oh, am I on? Oh, good.
Yes, you're on.
Sorry. You wanted me to start off with explaining why I chose to flip. I've got it basically, the first thing I should say is that I've got what they call in my term, chutzpah. Okay? I just jumped in. What could happen, you know? I just jumped in, and I flipped now totally every class I teach for 4 years. 4 years. So I'm like a veteran here. And what got me going is pretty much what has been said. But I'm a little bit different. My population of students, I'm in a community college. So my population of students is a broad range. I've got my traditional age students. I've got my returning adults. I've got my dispossessed adults, and by the way, my classes are all men. I don't know why, but they're still all men. And I've got very good students, and I've got some very not good students. I've got a very broad range. So I needed to find a way to not slow down the quick ones, but allow those who are, let's say, an ESL to listen to what I have to say 4 times with a transcript. You know, so that worked very well for them. So that was the first thing. But the other thing is, I don't look like Vanna White. I don't feel like Vanna White, and I resented becoming Vanna White. My students seem to have this expectation that classroom meant they would come in and they would sit, and I would come up to the board and I would have read the text, digested the text, and put up like Vanna White. And here are your 12 big points. And their job was they would write them down, and they would feel that then their job was to then just spit this out on a test. Firstly, I don't like being Vanna White. Secondly, I'm in a 2-year school. My students are going to the job place. That was not giving them the skills they needed for the job. The job requires an independent person that can learn, can troubleshoot and do all of that. So that was a big disconnect. And the last thing is that, like you, I've got way too much I've got to cover. I've got two disparate goals. Two different goals. One is there are certification tests in my field. And if any of you have taken a Microsoft cert, you know they're minutia. You know, on the 5th screen, the menu that is on this, I mean, it's just been, and I felt that was a waste of my time to go through all of that minutia in that class. And I wasn't even all that good. I've been teaching for 15 years. That wasn't my main strength. But what I really needed to teach them was troubleshooting, problem solving, and when they get on a job, because I teach in the networking world, I needed them to be able to go out and do. I can proudly say none of my students have ever been fired because they didn't know what they had to do. My students are skilled with their hands on. So the flipping allowed me to not have to deal with, to let the minutia be done online, and my classes can be like, okay, gang, let's bring up a Linux server and let's install the KDE desktop. And let them suffer through that when it dies and it crunches and it does all those things. And then let them say, oh my God, it doesn't work, and send them off. Oh, well, what would you do if I wasn't here? So that's what I like to do. So that's the why. And if you want to hear how I really improved it over time, I will be happy to address that after this beginning part.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Raymond.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
The why. When Carol came over and said, say something about why, one word came to mind: millennials. The students that we all teach, that I teach, are 19 years old. They get bored easily. They like to be active. They like group work. They are really familiar with technology in a lot of different ways, but maybe not necessarily the ways we want them to be familiar with it. So I wanted to address that audience. Another thing that I brought to it as to why is I've taught online graduate courses for at least 5 years. They're exclusively online. This is Shawn's experience as well. There is no ability to lecture in that context. You have to do something else. But beyond those points, I just see myself walking around the building, and some of the rooms have glass windows. And I look at the students, they're all sitting at a computer, and some are watching basketball games, others are using Facebook to keep up with friends, or they're doing email, or they're on their phone, or they're sleeping, or they're not even there physically, if not mentally. And the lecturer is happily, blissfully lecturing all the points on the current slide. I didn't want to do that anymore. So those are some of the reasons as to why. The other thing, one of the problems I found with lecturing, I mean, it's easier to prepare a course where I only have to create PowerPoint slides and then I could kind of wing it or make it up on the day of. Given the context of the week, I can adapt. It's all in my head and I can just make it become whatever it will be in the context. The problem though is that some of the students really know the stuff that's on that slide and they're bored to tears. And other students have no idea what you're talking about in terms of what's on that slide, and they're frantically writing, and they can't keep up with you. So it's really difficult to just hit the audience with a lecture. I needed something that had more variety. To get them on board, I didn't have a problem getting my students on board. Where I'm coming from, I was asked to teach a healthcare informatics course. I had no idea what that is. Last year at this time. So I had to learn about healthcare and informatics, and also I wanted to teach it in such a way that I didn't bore the students to tears. So to get them on board, it happened on the first day of class. I said to them, we go over the introduction to what's in the course and how we're going to grade it. I said, there will be no tests in this course. Everybody was on board. They wanted to know how I was going to go about that. Now, I have a project engineering background, and I teach project courses where the students don't take tests. Rather, they produce products, and they work together in groups, and they solve problems, and they troubleshoot, and they bang their head against the wall. But then they get to a small solution, and now they're excited, and they're buying into this problem thing. And they're also, I noticed they start coming to class together as a group. And they wait for each other so they can leave the class as a group. That evolves across the course of the semester. So I thought, let's try that. And that's in fact what I did. I created a series of mini projects, each of which led to a bigger mini project, which ultimately led to the semester mini project or project. And they really liked it. I asked them what they liked about the course the most. They liked coming to class. I was amazed. I have some statistics I'll share with you in the 12 o'clock session. But most of all, they liked learning from their group. And I was part of the group. I circulated. I was there. So that's the main reason, I would recommend highly that we try to move in this direction if at all possible. What I discovered was it takes longer to prepare because you're not putting up the slides. You also have to record the videos, and so that sort of doubles your time or more. But more than that, you have to adapt them, and that could be a problem. Like if you happen to miss a class and you have this thing all sequenced out for the week, and you're not there, you have to have a way of adapting to that. But I would highly recommend everyone give it a try. Just kind of realize as a tip that it's going to be a little difficult to get started. You're going to feel uncomfortable with this approach, and so will they. But the recommendation there is don't try to do too much in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Give them things that are pretty easy to do to get them into the process flow, the workflow. And once they buy into the workflow, you can pretty much do anything you want with them, and they're ready to go with it.
They talk about buying it, about the whole buy-in. One of the things that I discovered is it is very hard to teach an old dog, even a 19-year-old dog, new tricks. And if they've been a passive student for 19 years, to just dump this on them doesn't always lead to the best outcomes. So I'm in a fortunate spot that I didn't have to do a lot of the prep work because my lectures, I could get a canned product and just put that up. But I had to get my students to learn how to become this more involved student, which is rough. So last year I got a grant, and I said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to assume that these students don't know how to function here. And I am going to bring an educational support specialist into my class from day one that instead of me saying, okay guys, you're gonna have to spend more time at home doing this, that would say, oh, how are you gonna spend more time at home doing this? Oh, you're gonna have to go through all this work at home. Well, how are you gonna do all of that? What if you find that it bores you to tears? What? So I have some great stats that shows I can see with the software I have the amount of time my students spend on task at home. And when I had the educational support person there, they almost doubled the amount of time they spent at home on task. Because we were talking before, this generation of students has a really hard time taking what they learn in one class and bringing it to the next. What they learn in their Math 105 doesn't necessarily come with them. When they took their college lit class or their college English course, what they learn there does not come when I ask them, does not come to my class. So I needed some way to help them bring what they learned from one class to this class. And that was a big help too.
Shawn, do you want to add something?
Regarding the motivation and for students, that is, I think, overriding everything is the underlying principle that I've always found with our students is very simple. It's that when they think they are learning something, they're engaged.
Right.
It's really that simple. And I think we've talked a lot about the generation, and it's going to be different in 15 years too. We don't maybe know and appreciate exactly what's coming. I've got a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old at home, and they're just now getting to that point, the 6-year-old is, where I'm starting to have some of those wow moments with what's going on in schools, and I know some things that my colleagues relay just kind of make you realize if we don't adapt to their ability to learn and their style of learning, then that's when we're going to have the problem. So I have not had major problems with feedback in I call it the inverted classroom. I think it's a more technical term as an engineer, but in the inverted format, I haven't had problems with students really arguing that they don't like the style. It comes back to how much other stuff do they have to do and some of these other issues, and more importantly, if they're not learning and they don't feel like they're learning, then I think they perceive that it's a waste of time. I've been able, fortunately, to translate very well. I mean, that's our goal, but I've been able to have a lot of success with, I think, the students understanding the value of what they are watching on tape and how it's used in class. Even in my limited time frame that I've got right now, I'm extremely looking forward to being able to do that in a much more engaging, sit back. I mean, I have a tough time right now taking the 5 minutes out of class to recap what students learned in the lecture. I use a quiz to do it, and it's frankly more evaluative than it is formative. I need it to be both, but there's so many opportunities if the students do buy in, and that's why I said up front, giving them the idea, this is what to expect in the course, and trying to from day one, get that buy-in from the perspective of, look, you're going to learn. And if they feel like they're learning, at least my students in all of my courses have always been pretty good. Some of them are going to be lazy. You're never going to change that. Students are going to be students. It's not one size fit all. I've heard a lot of conversation today, and I'm sure we will later, about the top of the class and the bottom of the class. Those teaching challenges are never going to change. But I do think that the ability for students to buy in is what makes this even have potential. And if they feel like they're learning, that's usually when they do it. I don't think it's any different than why it got me started. Even the smart kids in this generation may not realize that they're learning the fundamental theory when you are quote unquote preaching to them. And building that base is important, but it's getting them to understand that.
Raymond?
Yeah, just a follow-up to that. I have another one word, metacognition, and that's a little more abstract or not as well known as Millennials, but it's the thinking about what you're thinking about and what, in terms of buy-in. When they, you were just saying, Shawn, when they think they're learning something, then they're engaged. What I suggest we do is give them opportunities to overtly reveal what they're thinking about and how they're learning and how they're going about learning by having that part of the assignment, to have them reflect on what they learned when they did this, and then bring those reflections into the classroom and share them with other people in the class, and let the class have a collective buy-in to this learning that's going on. I found that to be probably the most effective way of getting the groups to gel and appreciate the fact that they're learning stuff.
You've brought up thinking about learning, and what this approach, the flipped, inverted classroom learning approach, says to me is that we now know much more about learning in college-age students than we did even 15 years ago. And what we do know is that the more they are engaged in their own learning, the better they're going to retain it, and the better, and even the more motivated they will be. The problem is that sometimes their previous learning and even their previous capacity to learn is at a fairly low level on Bloom's hierarchy, if you're familiar with that. They're very comfortable with memorizing. And to put it on the other foot, we tend to be very comfortable with lecturing. So both sides of the desk are learning something new and maybe getting out of our comfort zones. You know, when we lecture, I think we have the illusion that we are in control. When we are not lecturing, and when students are in the class and they're talking to each other and we're not exactly sure whether they're talking about our subject area or their Saturday night dates, you know, it can be very anxiety producing. And the same is true for students. If they're used to sitting in a classroom, hearing a lecture, taking notes, giving it back, and all of a sudden we say, oh, this class is going to be arranged differently. You are going to be doing some of the learning for yourself, and in the classroom, we're going to be doing something different from what you're used to. You know, I think we do have to understand that, as I said, both sides of the desk are going to make an adjustment to this. All right, well, I think we have about 12 minutes, and I'm sure that people in the audience have questions. It's slightly hard to see because we have huge lights in our eyes. So yes, I do see a question here, and I will try to repeat them so that everyone can hear the question.
This question for you.
For me, okay.
As the director of the Weiss office, what kind of support does your office provide to faculty and teachers?
Okay, the question was, as I mentioned, I'm the director of our Teaching and Learning Center, and the question was, what kind of support does our center provide to faculty who want to flip their classroom? Well, first of all, I have to say that our office, the Villanova Institute for Teaching and Learning, may sound like a cast of thousands, but it consists of my administrative assistant and me, okay? I do a lot of one-to-one consultations with faculty who might email me and say, you know, I'm interested in flipping my classroom. I don't know what it's all about. I need to talk to someone. So I'll invite them in, or I'll go to their office. And as you've learned today, there are quite a few people on the campus who are already doing this. Depending on the discipline, I may say, well, why don't you go talk to Shawn? You know, why don't you go talk to Michael? Why don't you go talk to Susan? And in addition, my office does give small grants every year to faculty who want to do something that is innovative for them. And so that's another mechanism. Right, we also give brown bag lunches, and the flipped classroom has been the topic of 2 of those this year. So that's there are other ways, but I think that will answer your question. Okay. Yes?
I'm curious what sort of preparatory work you feel like you need to do with students before they do their individual learning. Like, do you feel like you need to sort of prime the pump, as it were, for them to go off and do their learning, or do you just sort of toss them into the video or whatever?
The question is, and this is for the panelists, what kind of preparatory work do you do with students to sort of prime them to begin learning on their own? Is that a fair?
Well, and I mean for like for an individual instance of learning, not the whole sense of
Right.
the process. Not
Right,
the
no,
process.
for going to view the videos, for example,
Right.
right?
So if you're going to view a video on a specific engineering topic, do you sort of give them a lead up, or do you just sort of ask them to do it and then lead up after?
So if they're going to view videos on a particular topic, do you give them some kind of guidelines in order before they view that, or do you just let them view it?
I think there are so many, one size doesn't fit all, and it's going to depend upon the discipline. As an engineer, I'm extremely focused on overall class organization, perhaps emphasis on extreme. So to answer your question, I don't think twice about it, because from day one they've got a schedule of how we're going to go from topic to topic, and we do emphasize through the entire course how one topic connects to another, connects to another, connects to another. So there are not a lot of, as discrete as all the individual elements are, the learning really is continuous, and it builds upon the previous set of problems that we solved, and that builds upon the other. So it's fairly easy in the courses I teach to not have to worry about that just based on the topic, and setting that up front of here's what to expect and here's how these different things are going to integrate throughout the course of the semester. So I don't have to do anything in my course to prep them for the videos other than kind of, let them know that we're on schedule and here's where we're headed with this throughout the main part. Others may.
For me, it depends. There are some topics that I know they're coming in with some basic background on. But for some topics, like if I'm bringing a topic like IPv6, which is a totally different way of doing things than how they did it before, I will give them here is some good background data to have. I will give them a prep talk before they go home, just so they have some background. Just so they have some background data that will give them the structure for the data to fit in. But again, it depends upon the topic. It also depends upon what your course is. Some groups need more. I don't know what that translates to, but
Right. Support?
support.
Raymond?
I find I can read a newspaper article a lot faster if I'm after something specific. How did Hamels pitch yesterday? I don't read all the other stuff. I just see that really fast. So I give them a scavenger hunt. They need to find answers to these questions in those videos. Here are the videos, here are the questions, find the answers. Bring them to class, and we're going to talk about your answers.
And the other, I mentioned briefly, it's very good if when you're making videos, you can actually embed questions in them or problems in them. Because that way, we know that sometimes when students are looking at screens, their brains tend to turn to the off position. And so if within the videos, they're asked to engage, that is going to promote their learning. Okay, yes? Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, okay.
Okay. The question is how this plays out differently in face-to-face courses as opposed to online courses. It seems to be a natural for online courses, but since at least two, and maybe Sue
teach
too,
online too.
also teach online, is that something you can address for us? Anyone? Raymond, did you? I know you.
Well, I started with online wondering how in the world I'm going to lecture. And it occurred to me to just do an MP3 file and give it with a PowerPoint. I'm on slide 1, let me talk about slide 1, turn to slide 2, let me talk about slide 2. It was basically what I do in Flipped right now, only now I embed the audio in the slides. So there's really no difference there. As far as online, it's hard to get co-location. Where face-to-face, everybody is co-located. You can have these nice discussions. But there are classrooms that I invite my online people to come into, and we have these chats once, maybe every 2 weeks or so. So there's a lot of convergence between the online and the face-to-face with the tools that are there.
I might just add a little different spin. I think it's actually, at least in my world, a better fit for non-online education. And I say that because the critical piece of the learning that's taking place is in the classroom. And I go back to where I started was, how do I best use these 35 hours of face-to-face time? Now, because I was comfortable with recording lectures for our graduate program and had done that for years, I didn't have any fear about, okay, well, what's going to happen when I sit down and record a lecture? I was pretty comfortable sitting in front of the camera with that. But I think it comes back to at least for me, the concept of why invert or why flip is how do you best use that face-to-face time. Now, that can be certainly done in an online environment in certain disciplines. I don't know that it works real well in my discipline, but for me, it comes back to how to use the in-class time.
There's a question over here.
Do any of you have any experience with team-taught courses and when some flip and some don't?
Everyone heard that, I presume. Yes? Okay.
I'm happy to answer this question because the person that's going to team teach this with me is about 3 rows behind you right now. In all seriousness, I think that the team teaching fits in if people are in the same boat, as we like to say. I don't think, we've talked many times, my colleague Dave Deinhardt and I, he hasn't done it yet because the course that we do co-teach, we have not yet done it. We are doing it next year. I feel like he's done it because we've had so many conversations about it. I know other colleagues it would be very difficult to have that conversation with, so I don't think it's any different in terms of team teaching. It's a separate issue, but it absolutely overlaps. If those people are not really cohesive in how they're going to present things, it's going to come across as disjointed. I don't think we've talked, you don't have to have every part of the course inverted. You can mix and match. You can do whatever works to do it best, but it all comes back to the cohesiveness of that presentation and that message and how that impacts the student learning. I mean, we're beyond uptight about what's in a certain color on a screen and those sorts of things, but that's because A, we're engineers, and B, we know that simplifies the student process of recalling that information and learning. So I don't see any barriers team teaching wise that are different with the inverted classroom than they are, let's say, regular teaching in a team environment. If the people can communicate, it works.
I'm afraid that we're out of time, but we will be happy to hang around for a few minutes if you have questions that haven't been answered. So thank you very much for coming.